What if I told you that the worst night of your life could become the beginning of something impossible to imagine? The pack had made their decision at sunset. Elara stood in the circle of judgment, her pale skin almost luminous against the darkening forest, silver markings trailing down her arms like frozen lightning. The council elder's words cut deeper than any claw could ever reach. Cursed. The spirits themselves marked you wrong from birth. Not weak, not soft. Cursed. Her white hair caught the last rays of sunlight like fresh snow, her colorless eyes reflecting nothing but the disgust in their faces. The strange symbols etched into her flesh since she took her first breath, all proof of something twisted, broken, wrong in her very existence. 23 winters she had endured their whispers, their crossed fingers when she passed, mothers pulling children away from her path as if her mere presence could contaminate their young. But tonight, Alpha Marcus, the male who had accepted their bond only out of obligation, never warmth, spoke the final sentence that would change everything. No pack can harbor what the spirits have damned. You bring misfortune to every soul who shelters you. The bond between them shattered like ice thrown against stone. Elara felt it snap in her chest, a physical breaking that stole her breath and left her gasping. She didn't beg, didn't cry, didn't give them the satisfaction of seeing her break. She simply turned and walked into the forest. As the first snow began to fall, each flake landing on her white hair like a blessing from a goddess who had abandoned her long ago. Hours passed in silence, broken only by her footsteps crunching through fresh powder. The cold bit through her threadbare cloak, but Omega's ran hot with survival instinct. She would find shelter, perhaps the abandoned den near the ravine. She would endure this night. She always had. She always would. The scent hit her first, thick and metallic, the copper tang of life essence spilled across snow, mixed with something wild and vast that made her wolf recoil in instinctive submission deep within her chest. Alpha. Not just any alpha, something far more powerful than anything she had ever encountered. She found him collapsed between two ancient oaks, his massive gray wolf form barely drawing breath. Crimson liquid pooled black beneath him in the snow, staining the pure white like a violation. His side was torn open, ribs visible through matted fur. Each breath rattled in his chest like broken glass. Elara's hands trembled as she knelt beside him, her knees sinking into snow mixed with his life essence. Common sense screamed at her to run far and fast. An alpha, this powerful, this wounded, was dangerous beyond any measure she could comprehend. Fading predators attacked anything that came close, a final act of violence before their existence ceased. But his golden eyes found hers through the darkness, aware, conscious, filled with something that looked almost like resignation, acceptance of his approaching end. "I won't leave you," she whispered, though she didn't understand why she spoke to a creature who couldn't possibly understand her words. Her pack had just cast her out like spoiled meat. Why save anyone when the world had made clear she was worth nothing? But her hands moved anyway, guided by the herb knowledge her grandmother had taught her before taking her final breath 3 winters past. Yarrow to slow the flow of life essence from his wounds. Comfrey poultice pressed into the torn flesh with steady pressure. Her own cloak, thin, barely warm, her only protection, wrapped around him, sharing what little heat she possessed. The wolf watched her through every moment, those 2 intelligent eyes tracking her movements with an awareness that should have been impossible for any animal. "They called me cursed tonight," Elara heard herself talking, words spilling out as her hands worked to save a stranger's existence. "Threw me out like I was nothing. 23 years I tried to prove I belonged somewhere. 23 years of being told I was wrong just for existing." She pressed harder on the worst wound, feeling his heartbeat stutter and skip beneath her palms. "My markings, they said the spirits made a mistake when they touched me, that I'm broken beyond repair, that I bring misfortune to everyone near me." Her voice cracked despite her best efforts to remain strong. "Maybe they're right. Maybe I am cursed. Maybe everything I touch withers and fades." The wolf made a sound, not quite a whimper, not quite a growl. Something in between that spoke of awareness beyond animal instinct. His massive head shifted, and suddenly he was looking directly into her eyes with an intensity that froze the breath in her lungs. "Kind of funny, if this story's already grabbed you, Don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you don't miss what happens next. Anyway, back to that moment in the snow. She finished binding the wounds with strips torn from her underdress, her fingers numb with cold and wet with his crimson essence. The wolf's breathing steadied slightly, still labored, still weak, but no longer the death rattle that had greeted her. He would survive until morning. Probably. Maybe. Elara settled against the tree beside him, exhaustion crashing through her body like a physical wave. The forest was silent except for falling snow and the wolf's labored breathing. Her eyelids grew impossibly heavy. Just for a moment, she would rest. The wolf lifted his head slowly, deliberately. Every movement spoke of effort that cost him dearly. But his golden eyes, bright with awareness that no mere animal should ever possess, locked onto hers with absolute focus. He saw her, not the cursed markings that made others turn away. Not the white hair or pale skin that marked her as wrong, not the Omega weakness her pack had rejected. He saw her, and something in that gaze carried a promise that this frozen night would alter the course of both their existences forever. Dawn broke with a presence that pressed against Elara's consciousness like physical weight pushing down on her chest. She woke to find the wolf gone and a man standing above her, tall, broad-shouldered, radiating power that made every Omega instinct in her body scream to submit immediately. His eyes were the same gold as the wolf's. The realization struck her like lightning. She scrambled backward against the tree, her heart hammering so hard she thought her ribs might crack. This man, this impossibly powerful presence, had been the creature she saved, had heard every word she spoke, had witnessed her at her most vulnerable and broken. "You saved my existence." His voice carried command, even wrapped in gratitude, each word spoken with the certainty of someone accustomed to absolute obedience. Dark hair fell to his shoulders, and he wore the crimson and black of the royal house emblazoned across his chest. Recognition crashed through her like a tidal wave. Alpha King Kale, the most powerful alpha in 5 territories, the warrior whose very name made enemies surrender before battle even began. You were fading." Her voice trembled despite her efforts to sound calm. The pheromones rolling off him were overwhelming. Smoke and leather and ancient forests and authority itself made tangible. Her Omega nature responded against her will, warmth pooling in her stomach. "I was mere moments from the end." He moved closer, and she caught something else threaded through his scent, something that made her skin warm despite the morning chill still clinging to the air, something that called to a part of her she didn't understand. "And you, little curse-marked Omega, pulled me back from that edge when you had every reason to let me fade into nothing." Before she could formulate a response, his hand caught her chin with surprising gentleness, tilting her face up toward his. His pupils dilated as he breathed in deeply, drawing her scent into his lungs. The reaction was instant, visceral, undeniable. His entire body went rigid, every muscle locking into place. "No," he whispered, the word barely audible. Then louder, almost angry, as if the universe itself had betrayed him. "No, this cannot possibly be." "What?" Panic flooded through her veins like ice water. "What's wrong?" The sacred bond. His grip on her chin tightened fractionally, not painful, but absolutely inescapable. "The moon goddess chose you as my true pair, my destined match written in the stars themselves." The words meant nothing and everything simultaneously. True pairs were legend, myth spoken of in whispered stories, destiny written in starlight by the goddess herself, a bond that transcended pack law, social status, even choice itself. 2 souls forged as perfect complements before their first breath. "That's impossible. I'm cursed. I'm broken. You're mine." The words emerged as pure alpha command, brooking absolutely no argument from any living creature. "And I will not permit anyone to harm what belongs to me now." Do you know what happens when true pairs meet for the first time? The bond recognizes itself immediately, undeniable as gravity. 4 hours later, Elara stood in the grand hall of the palace, still wearing her torn dress stained with his crimson essence and forest dirt. The entire court had assembled at the king's urgent summons, hundreds of eyes fixed on her with expressions ranging from confusion to disgust to barely concealed hostility. She had been unconscious during the journey here, exhausted beyond measure from the night's ordeal. Kael's hand remained locked around her wrist like an iron manacle as he addressed the gathered nobles, his pheromones flooding the cavernous room with undeniable dominance that forced every alpha present to lower their gaze. "Behold your queen." His voice carried to every corner despite speaking at normal volume, the alpha command ensuring every ear heard clearly. "Chosen by the moon goddess herself is my true pair. The bond between us is sacred and absolute. Any who question this arrangement will answer directly to me." Elara's breath stopped completely in her lungs. Queen. He had declared her queen while she lay unconscious and helpless. No discussion, no consultation, no consideration for what she might want. He had simply decided her fate as if she were a piece on a game board. The court erupted in whispers that echoed off marble and gold. She heard the words clearly despite their attempts at discretion. Cursed, marked, abomination, wrong, contaminated, unworthy, disaster. Lady Morgana, eldest of the council members, stepped forward with thinly veiled contempt twisting her aristocratic features. "Your Majesty, surely you cannot mean to elevate this creature to rule beside you. The prophecies speak of cursed blood bringing ruin." "The prophecies," Kyle's voice dropped to something deadly quiet, "speak of true pairs being sacred above all other bonds. Would you question the goddess herself, counselor?" Morgana's mouth snapped shut, but the hatred in her eyes remained burning bright. Elara turned to face Kyle, fury momentarily overwhelming every Omega instinct screaming at her to submit to his dominance. "You had no right." "I had every right." His golden eyes locked onto hers, absolute in their certainty, unmovable as mountains. "I am king. I am your alpha, and I publicly claimed you as my future queen before witnesses. This is established fact now, irreversible by any law or custom." Her hands shook with rage that bordered on volcanic. "This isn't protection, Your Majesty. This is control." Something flickered across his expression. Was it regret? Guilt? But his voice remained iron when he responded. "Control that keeps your existence intact. You have no concept of the forces already moving against you. Forces you created by dragging me here. Forces that would have found you regardless." His grip on her wrist tightened almost imperceptibly. "At least here, you are under my protection. Out there, alone, cursed, rejected." He let the implication hang heavy between them. She wanted to scream, to rage, to demand he release her immediately, but the rational part of her mind recognized the trap she was in. He was right about one thing. She had nowhere else to go. No pack would accept her now that her previous one had cast her out. Lone Omegas rarely survived a full season. "I didn't ask for your protection," she whispered, hating how her voice cracked. "No," Kale agreed quietly, his thumb brushing across her pulse point in a gesture that might have been meant as comfort. "But you have it regardless, whether you want it or not." The palace became a prison wrapped in silk and gold. 3 days passed since Kyle's declaration before the assembled court, and Elara learned quickly that being queen meant being watched constantly, always observed, never alone, never truly safe. The servants whispered when they thought she couldn't hear their hushed conversations. The nobles turned their backs in hallways, making signs against evil as she passed. And the council, 5 ancient alphas who advised the throne, regarded her with barely concealed hostility that radiated from them like heat from a forge. Lady Morgana, the council's most vocal member and clearly their unofficial leader, made her position crystal clear during the first state dinner. She waited until the meal was half finished, until witnesses filled every seat, before speaking loudly enough for all to hear. "A cursed Omega is queen? The spirits will punish us all for this blasphemy against natural order." Kale's response had been immediate and absolutely brutal in its efficiency. His alpha command dropped Morgana to her knees mid-sentence, forcing submission so complete she gasped for air like a landed fish. The sound of her body hitting marble echoed through the suddenly silent hall. She remained there, trembling, until he released her with a casual wave. But Elara saw the truth in the woman's eyes even as she bowed and retreated. This wasn't over. Not remotely close to finished. Fear breeds desperation, and desperate people commit desperate acts. It happened on the 4th night, when the moon hung full and heavy outside her window. Elara woke to the scent of nightshade drifting through her chambers, subtle, sweet beneath its toxicity, absolutely lethal in the right concentration. The tea beside her bed, brought by a servant she had begun to trust. She hadn't drunk it yet, some instinct making her hesitate. Footsteps in the corridor outside. Too many, too purposeful, too coordinated to be normal patrol. The door burst inward with enough force to splinter the wooden frame. Not her usual servants. 6 guards in unmarked armor, their eyes glazed with compulsion so strong it overrode every natural instinct. Someone had commanded them, used alpha will powerful enough to break their loyalty to their king entirely. The prophecy cannot be permitted to come to pass. The lead guard's voice was hollow, empty, like a puppet speaking another's words. The marked one must not rule. The spirits demand her removal. Elara backed toward the balcony, her heart hammering against her ribs hard enough to bruise. Kyle will destroy every single one of you for this betrayal. The king cannot protect what the spirits themselves have rejected as unnatural. They advanced in perfect formation, clearly trained warriors despite the compulsion overriding their wills. She had nowhere to run. 3 stories down to the stone courtyard below. Certain ending either way. The guards drew blades, iron, not silver, specifically chosen to make her suffering last as long as possible. This changed my existence completely in 30 days. But I didn't know that yet. The first guard lunged, blade aimed for her stomach. Elara's survival instinct screamed through every nerve, and something else screamed with it, something that had slept beneath her skin since her first breath, coiled in those silver markings like chains barely holding back an ocean. The markings ignited across her entire body. Pure silver light exploded from her skin, bright enough to blind, and the temperature in the room dropped so fast that frost formed on every surface in seconds. The guard's blade shattered mid-swing, metal screaming as molecular bonds broke under impossible cold. Then the shadows moved with terrible purpose. Not normal shadows. These had form, had substance, had hunger that had been denied for centuries. Ancient shapes poured from the darkness behind Elara like smoke given solid flesh, spectral warriors with eyes like dying stars, their forms shifting between corporeal and vapor. Their armor was archaic, their weapons forged from rage itself made tangible. The spirits her markings had imprisoned for 23 years, the forgotten ones, the unavenged who refused to fade. The guards tried to flee. Far too late for salvation, the spirits tore through them like winter wind through dead leaves. No crimson liquid, the bodies simply unmade themselves, dissolved into ash and screaming that cut off too abruptly to be natural. One moment, 6 men stood breathing. The next, only gray powder remained settling slowly to the floor. Elara couldn't stop the flow. The power roared through her veins like wildfire, vast and terrible, and absolutely beyond any control she might attempt. The spirits multiplied, pouring through her chambers into the corridor beyond, like a flood breaking through a dam. More screaming echoed from deeper in the palace, more endings, more ash. She felt each spirit as they emerged, their rage, their hunger, their absolute refusal to return to imprisonment. They had waited so long, suffered so long. Now they would feast. "Elara!" Kyle's roar cut through the chaos like a blade through silk. She heard him fighting his way up the stairs, felt his alpha presence like a beacon in darkness. His fury shook the very stones of the palace. But he was too far away to help. The spirits sensed more prey and surged toward the sounds of battle, toward him, toward the king who could potentially force them back into their prison. No. Elara's scream carried every ounce of will she possessed, every desperate need to protect the one person who had chosen her. The spirits froze mid-surge, turned as one, hundreds of eyes like dying stars fixed on her, and she understood with bone-deep certainty that transcended conscious thought. They obeyed her. Not Kale. Not the moon goddess who had supposedly chosen them both, her alone, the cursed one, the marked one. The vessel prepared since before her birth, the one the forgotten ones had been waiting for through centuries of imprisonment. Kyle burst through her doorway, golden eyes blazing with alpha fury hot enough to burn, clearly ready to defend his queen against any threat. He stopped short, his momentum dying as he took in the scene before him. The ash piles scattered across marble floors, all that remained of 6 warriors, the spectral army hovering around Elara like a crown woven from nightmares and vengeance, her silver markings blazing bright enough to hurt unprotected eyes, and Elara herself standing at the center of destruction, her pale skin luminous, her white hair floating in an ethereal wind that touched nothing else in the room. She looked at him with eyes that now reflected the spirit's starlight, no longer quite human. "They tried to end my existence," she whispered, her voice carrying harmonics that hadn't been there before. "So I ended theirs first." The spirits shifted restlessly around her, waiting for her next command, waiting to know if the king himself would be their next target. The spirits retreated into Elara's markings slowly, reluctantly, like predators called away from fresh prey they hadn't finished consuming. The silver lines on her skin pulsed with their presence, brighter than before, as if fed by the endings they had delivered. Each spirit left an impression as it merged back into her flesh, ancient rage, betrayal, the desperate need for vengeance denied for centuries. Kyle stood motionless in the doorway, his powerful frame tense as coiled steel. His alpha pheromones had shifted dramatically, no longer just authority and protection, but something else threading through the dominant scent, something Elara recognized intimately because she had lived with it her entire existence. Fear. "How long have you carried them?" His voice was carefully controlled, each word measured and precise, but she heard the tension vibrating beneath like a plucked string. "Since my first breath." Her hands trembled as the adrenaline began to fade, leaving exhaustion in its wake. "I didn't know what they were. I thought the markings were just visible proof of how wrong I am, how cursed. I never felt them as separate entities until tonight when my existence was threatened. They're not simply spirits wandering between worlds." Kyle moved closer with the caution of someone approaching a wounded predator, respectful, wary, ready to retreat. "They're the forgotten ones, ancient warriors who experienced endings so violent, so unjust, that their rage transcended the boundary between life and whatever comes after. The oldest texts say they were sealed away by the first shamans because nothing in this world or the next could destroy them permanently." He reached out slowly, fingers hovering over her arm where the markings blazed brightest. The silver light reflected in his golden eyes, creating strange patterns. "You're not cursed, Elara. You're their vessel, their prison, and now their weapon." The realization crashed through her like a physical blow. 23 years of rejection, of being called wrong and broken and contaminated, and the truth was, she had been carrying an army of vengeful entities beneath her skin since before she could walk. Her entire existence had been shaped by something she never understood. The council knew. Understanding dawned cold and certain as winter sunrise. That's why they attempted to end me. Not because of some vague prophecy about cursed rulers, because if I stayed close to you, close to power and authority, eventually something would trigger the spirit's awakening. I couldn't believe what I witnessed that night. Everything I thought I knew was fiction. Kyle's jaw tightened, muscles jumping beneath his skin. Lady Morgana's grandfather served as royal archivist for 40 years. She would have access to the oldest records, the forbidden texts kept in the deepest vaults. She knew exactly what you were from the moment I presented you to the court. "And you?" Elara's voice hardened despite her exhaustion. "Did you know when you claimed me before everyone, when you decided my fate without permission?" "No." His gold eyes met hers with absolute honesty that she felt through their nascent bond. "I knew only that you were my true pair, that the connection between us was undeniable and sacred. The spirits, I sensed power in you, something vast and sleeping beneath your consciousness, but not this specific manifestation." He gestured to the ash piles scattered across her floor, all that remained of 6 warriors who had breathed and walked mere moments ago. Not an army of the vengeful ended who hunger for retribution against the living. The fear in his scent intensified slightly, and Elara felt something inside her chest crack like ice beginning to thaw. Even her true pair, the most powerful alpha in 5 territories, the warrior whose name made enemies surrender, was afraid of what she carried beneath her marked skin. "I can't control them," she whispered, the admission costing her pride dearly. "When they emerged, It felt like a dam breaking after holding back a river for decades. I wanted desperately to stop, but they just kept coming, kept ending lives. They stopped when you commanded them. Kyle's hand finally made contact with her arm, warm against her cold skin, the touch sending sparks through their bond. That's more control than anyone in the ancient legends ever achieved. Most vessels were consumed completely, becoming nothing more than puppets for the Forgotten One's rage. What if next time I can't manage it? The question hung between them like a blade. What if they decide they want more endings? What if they turn on you, on the palace inhabitants, on innocent people who had nothing to do with... A horn blast cut through the night air, sharp and urgent. Then another, the pattern deliberate and unmistakable. The warning bells began to ring across the city, their bronze voices crying alarm into the darkness. Kyle's head snapped toward the window, his alpha instincts immediately reading the coded signals. Enemy attack! The northern clans, they've breached the outer defensive walls. He turned back to Elara, and she saw the calculation in his eyes, the impossible choice no king should ever face. His true pair carried entities of ending itself, barely controlled, dangerous to ally and enemy alike without distinction. But the enemy was at the gates with weapons drawn and hostile intent clear. How many approach? Elara asked quietly, already knowing the answer would be dire. Reports before tonight said 3,000 warriors were gathering at the border. Kyle's voice was grim as stone. We have 800 defenders currently within the palace walls. The outer city guard was pulled back when we received intelligence of the assassination attempt on you. She looked at her hands, at the silver markings that pulsed with imprisoned rage, eager for release. An army of the vengeful ended, waiting for her permission, hungry for battle, starving for the violence they had been denied. I can stop them, she said, meeting his gaze directly, or you could end us all without distinction between friend and foe. The words hung between them, truth spoken plainly. She was powerful beyond measure and completely untrained, a weapon that might explode in the hand of whoever tried to wield it. Another horn blast, closer now. The sound of battering rams against reinforced gates echoed across the palace grounds. Kyle made his decision. There's a way described in the oldest texts, when bonded pairs channeled the Forgotten Ones together, working in perfect synchronization. The Alpha serves as anchor, grounding the Omega's power, preventing it from consuming her consciousness entirely. You mean completing the true pair bond? Elara's breath caught in her throat. But we haven't finished the ritual. You gave me choice, time to decide if I wanted this. Time we no longer have in any measure. His golden eyes burned into hers with intensity that stole her breath. The bond would allow me to feel your limits, to pull you back if the spirits try to take you completely. But it requires your willing acceptance, not command, not duty or obligation. Free choice given without coercion. This secret is known by only 1% of people who study the ancient bonds. Another explosion rocked the palace foundations. Closer now. The enemy was advancing with frightening speed. If I say yes, Elara whispered, her voice barely audible above the distant sounds of combat, is it really choice, or is it coercion dressed in urgency and wrapped in necessity? Kyle's hand slipped away from her arm, the sudden absence of his warmth leaving her skin cold. Then I go to battle alone. My soldiers face their end, the city burns to ash, but you remain free of me and any obligation to this bond. He turned toward the door, and every line of his powerful body radiated alpha determination and resignation. I will not force this connection, Elara, not even to save my kingdom, not even to preserve my own existence. She watched him take 3 steps toward the doorway. 4, 5. His scent was already shifting to battle readiness, leather and smoke and the steel edge of violence preparing to meet violence. He was actually leaving, actually giving her the choice he had stolen before. My hands were shaking when I realized what I had to do. He had claimed her before the court without permission, dragged her into this palace against any protest she might have made, stolen her choice about becoming queen, made her fate a matter of royal decree rather than personal decision. But now, when it mattered most desperately, when his kingdom hung in the balance and 3,000 enemies hammered at his gates, he was walking away, offering her the freedom to refuse. Kyle! Her voice stopped him at the threshold, his hand already reaching for the door handle. "You said the moon goddess chose me as your true pair." "She did." He didn't turn around, his shoulders tense as carved stone. "Why?" The question she had been too angry to ask before, too wrapped in her own pain to consider. Why would she choose someone cursed, someone marked by spirits, someone who carries ending itself beneath her skin, someone rejected by every pack who ever knew her existence? He looked back slowly, and the raw honesty in his expression stole whatever breath remained in her lungs. "Because I needed someone strong enough to survive standing beside me, strong enough to challenge me when I overstep, someone who understood suffering intimately and still chose compassion over cruelty." His voice roughened with emotion he didn't bother hiding. "I found you saving a fading wolf when you had every reason to let him perish. You could have walked past, should have walked past, but you didn't." Another horn blast shattered the moment. The enemy was inside the second defensive wall now. She could hear steel clashing against steel, could smell smoke on the wind from fires being set deliberately. "They're coming," Kyle said quietly, turning back toward the door. "And I need to go before more of my people experience their end." Elara felt the spirits stirring beneath her skin, eager and hungry for the violence that called to them like a siren song. She could release them now, let them slaughter indiscriminately without his guidance, hope she survived the aftermath of their hunger. Or she could trust him, trust the Alpha who had protected her even when it meant defying his own counsel, who had given her the palace's finest chambers, who posted guards at her door not to imprison but to shield, who now offered her the choice he had stolen before, even as it cost him everything. "Wait." Elara crossed to him, her bare feet silent on cold stone still marked with ash from the earlier violence. The silver markings on her skin pulsed brighter as she moved, responding to her decision before she fully articulated it. "I choose you, not because of duty or fear or urgency or any obligation, but because you're the only person in my entire existence who ever saw me instead of what I carry." Kyle's eyes widened fractionally, hope and disbelief warring across his features. "Elara." "I choose you," she repeated, reaching up to cup his face with both hands, forcing him to meet her gaze. "Freely, willingly, completely. Because you gave me back the choice you stole. Because you're walking away when you desperately need me. Because that means everything." The bond ignited between them, like summer lightning captured in living flesh. Gold and silver light intertwined, racing through their joined hands, up their arms, settling into their chests where true pairs carried each other's essence. Elara gasped as she felt him flood through her consciousness, his determination, his bone-deep fear for his people, his absolute need to protect her even at cost to himself. And he felt her in return. The loneliness she had carried since childhood like a stone around her neck. The strength forged in rejection and suffering. The spirits howling beneath her skin like caged storms, eager for release. "We're out of time," Kyle breathed against her hair, pulling her tight against his chest until she could feel his heart thundering against her own. "Can you control them with me as anchor?" "I don't know," she admitted honestly, "but we'll learn together, or face ending together." "Then we learn." He caught her hand, lacing their fingers together so tightly she felt their pulses synchronize through the bond pulsing stronger between them. "They're waiting at the main gate, 3,000 warriors with siege weapons and hostile intent. Are you ready?" Elara looked at their intertwined hands, his tanned skin against her pale silver markings, glowing where they touched like starlight made solid. She felt the spirits pressing against her consciousness, eager and vicious and barely restrained by her will alone. But beneath that overwhelming power, she felt Kyle, solid as stone, unshakable as mountains, her anchor in any storm that might come. "I'm ready," she said, and meant it with every fiber of her being. They ran through the palace corridors together, hand in hand, the bond between them singing like taut wire, vibrating with energy. Elara felt Kale's battle instincts guiding their path through his consciousness, flowing into hers, the fastest route to the main gate, the strategic position that would give them maximum advantage against superior numbers. The sounds of combat grew louder with every step, steel clashing against steel, warriors screaming their battle cries, the wet sounds of bodies falling to stone. Smoke filled the air, acrid and choking. They burst onto the battlements just as the main gate shattered inward under sustained battering. Northern warriors poured through the breach like a flood given human form, hundreds upon hundreds, thousands, their war cries shaking the very stones beneath her feet. Kale's defenders formed desperate lines, shields locked together, but they were outnumbered nearly 4-1. Elara watched a young soldier go down under 3 enemy blades, watched the defensive formation start to crumble under relentless pressure. Now, Kyle's voice was steady beside her, his presence in her mind rock solid and unshakable. Let them out. I've got you. I won't let them take you. Elara closed her eyes and reached for the spirits with intention instead of panic. They surged forward eagerly, no longer imprisoned but invited. The silver markings across her entire body ignited, blazing so bright that warriors on both sides turned to stare in shock and terror. The Forgotten Ones poured from her skin like smoke made solid and given terrible purpose. Dozens, hundreds, more emerging with every heartbeat, an army of spectral warriors with eyes like dying stars and weapons forged from rage itself made tangible and deadly. But this time felt completely different. Elara felt Kale's presence wrapped around her consciousness like steel cables woven through silk. When the spirits tried to push further, to multiply beyond any reasonable control, his alpha will held them back with absolute authority. When they turned hungry eyes toward the defending soldiers, seeing only potential prey without distinction, she felt his guidance steering them toward the true enemy with surgical precision. What if everything you've been taught about power was incomplete? The northern warriors saw their ending approaching and tried to flee. Far too late for any salvation, the spirits hit them like a tidal wave of pure destruction. But unlike the massacre in her chambers, this was precision warfare. The Forgotten Ones moved in perfect formation, fighting alongside Kale's soldiers rather than simply slaughtering everything in sight without distinction. They targeted only the enemy forces, leaving defenders completely untouched even when they passed through the same physical space. Elara felt every single spirit, controlled each one through the bond with Kale, acting as her filter and focus. His tactical mind, honed through decades of warfare, directed their strikes while her will commanded their absolute obedience. Together, they were devastating beyond anything either could achieve alone. An enemy alpha charged toward the battlements, massive in his wolf form and clearly aiming to eliminate the source of the spirit army. Kyle shifted instantly, his golden wolf meeting the gray attacker in midair with a clash that cracked stone beneath them. Elara felt his pain through the bond when claws raked his shoulder, felt his fierce joy when his jaws closed on the enemy's throat with crushing force. She sent spirits to support him immediately, and together they brought the alpha down permanently. The battle became a dance of silver and gold. Kale fought with primal alpha ferocity while Elara wove the spirits around him like living armor made from vengeance itself. When he was surrounded, she cleared his path with surgical strikes. When she felt the spirits pulling too hard toward bloodlust, his steady presence pulled her back to tactical focus. I cried from overwhelming emotion for an entire hour after witnessing this. Silver and gold light intertwined across the battlefield like twin comets, her pale skin glowing bright enough to illuminate the night, his golden eyes blazing with alpha fury. True pairs fighting as one organism, unstoppable and beautiful and absolutely terrifying to behold. The northern clans broke under the sustained assault. Those who could still run fled back through the shattered gate, abandoning hundreds of their companions. The spirits consumed those who fell, growing stronger with each ending, but Elara felt when they had had enough. She called them back, and they obeyed without hesitation, flowing into her markings like water returning to a well. The battlefield fell silent except for the moans of wounded defenders being tended by healers rushing forward. Kyle shifted back to human form, crimson liquid streaming from a dozen wounds across his torso and arms, but alive, victorious, unbroken. He crossed to where Elara stood swaying on the battlements, catching her before exhaustion could take her completely. His arms wrapped around her like steel bands. "You did it," he breathed against her white hair, his voice rough with emotion and fatigue. "We did it together," She looked up at him, seeing her own exhaustion reflected in his face. But beneath that overwhelming tiredness, she felt the bond humming between them. Complete now, unbreakable, forged in battle and choice and trust, earned rather than commanded or stolen. He kissed her then, deeply and desperately, tasting like smoke and victory and copper tang of his own crimson essence. When they broke apart for air, his eyes blazed gold, not just his own natural color, but reflecting her silver light merged with his essence through their completed bond. He grabbed her hand suddenly, their fingers interlacing as the bond pulsed stronger between them with renewed energy. "They're regrouping at the northern border," he said, reading reports flowing to him through his Alpha network from scouts positioned miles away. "This was merely their first wave, testing our defenses. The main force numbers 10,000 strong, according to latest intelligence." He paused, searching her face with intensity that made her breath catch. "Testing. Offering one more choice even now. Your reign won't begin in the palace among courtiers and ceremony and peaceful negotiations. It begins on the battlefield, standing beside me, with enemies at every border, and their ending on our hands. Are you prepared for that reality?" Elara looked at their joined hands, felt the spirits settling contentedly beneath her skin, no longer prisoners in eternal torment, but weapons she had mastered and controlled. Felt Kale's presence wrapped around her consciousness, anchor and partner, and equal in every measure that mattered. She met his golden eyes with her own colorless gaze, no longer seeing curse or wrongness when she looked at herself through his perception flowing through their bond. Just strength, just power, just choice freely given. "I'm ready," she said firmly, squeezing his hand. "Let's show them what true pairs can accomplish together." They stood together on the battlements, silver and gold intertwined, as dawn broke over a battlefield littered with evidence of their combined power. The palace guards, who remained standing, looked at their queen with new expressions, no longer disgust or fear, but awe mixed with healthy respect. Lady Morgana watched from a distant tower window, her face pale with the realization that her assassination attempt had merely awakened something far more dangerous than she could have imagined. And in the north, 10,000 warriors prepared for battle, unaware that they marched toward their own ending. If this story resonated in your heart, share in the comments which moment touched you the most. Thank you for your time.